Good day everyone, welcome to the course on biological data analysis and visualization with R. In the last class we introduced decision trees. This is an algorithm that helps us classify and classify biological samples as well as build regression models where we want to predict the values of a response variable. We talked about different components of regression trees as well as the steps that we have to take to build a construction or to construct a regression tree, and then we have seen with some very simple examples what are the different criteria that we can use for building construction trees. So, in this class we will be talking about classification and regression trees, and we will be doing some hands on where we will be actually applying the concepts and then build these classification and regression trees in R using R packages, right. So, that is the agenda for this class. We will be talking about first classification trees and regression trees, and we will be doing hands on with these classification trees. So, as just to remind you, for decision trees there could be two types. One is classification trees, which is used for classification of biological samples, right. And we have seen these data sets already. There is this cancer data set, there is this noise data set, where we actually want to classify samples to different classes, and this is the kind of data where classification trees could be useful. On the other hand, we have also seen other data sets where we want to predict the value of some parameter like the gene expression noise in linear regression analysis, and in this kind of situation we can build regression trees where you want to predict the values of the response variable. For the hands on for decision trees we will be using this R package RPart, or there is another function that you can use is this C-tree function from the package particule, right. So, these links are given so that you can also go and check these functions and the packages and the functions there. For the hands on for classification tree, you can for example look into cancer type classification as we have done before. You can try that out first, and then we can also do classification of genes based on noise data. Again, we have tried this earlier, right, in logistic regression. So, again we can try in decision tree and see how this method works and whether there is any improvement or not. Okay, and similarly we will do also hands on regression trees where we will be looking at each gene expression noise data, and we will see if we can predict gene expression noise using these decision trees. Okay, so, let us now move into the hands on part in R, and let us try these different methods, and we will first try the classification and then we will try the regression part. Okay, so, here is the R code again, right. We are loading required packages. You are familiar with all these packages now. You are also familiar with this data, right. So, we are starting with the cancer data first. We have seen this before, and here is the 100 genes data and along with the labels of the data, right. So, we have seen this data before. We have expression labels of 103 genes and we have the labels for cancer types, and these labels are given here in this data labels, I think. Yeah, and here we have the cancer type and the label value 0, 1, 2 and so on. Okay, so, we are familiar with this data set now. We also know how many samples we have for each cancer type, and we have done this before as well. We are choosing only a subset, right, because otherwise if we run on this full data set it will take a lot of time. So, I will just demonstrate with a small data set, and you can try out with the full data set or even bigger data sets. We will replace the data labels with the names or the abbreviations of cancer types, right. Instead of keeping it 0, 1, 2, 3, 4 etc., we will just give the abbreviation, right, LAM, LACC, at least so that we can kind of like associate them with specific cancer types. The other thing you should also notice, this is also stored as factor, right. So, this is actually important for classification, right. We have to store this as factor. Okay, so we can simply first look into this just the data, right. We have changed it. So we are taking only 20 genes, I think, right, and then we have the labels, which is the cancer type. We are working with this small data set just for the sake of time. The next step, as you are all familiar with, is the splitting the data into training data and test data. Okay, and again 80% of the data will go into training and 20% will be in the test data set. So, we will be building the model on the training data set, and then we will then predict on the test data set. Data is level, so every level or every cancer type should be represented in the training data. So, that is important, right. So, this is now done, right. We have prepared the data, we have split it into training data set and testing data set. The next thing that is remaining is the next step, of course, is building the decision tree. Okay, and for doing that, we will use this library rpart, and we will also use this library rpart.plot, right. So, this is a package that will be used for plotting the data. So, I just wanted to show you, right, this is where you will find this page for rpart, right. This is a recursive partitioning and regression tree. So, you can build classification tree as well as regression tree here, right, with this method. Here is the manual, and you can see these functions, right, all the functions that are available for us, right, to use. Again, you can go through this manual, and there would be some examples, right, telling you how to use these functions here in R. Okay, so what we will do is we will build this decision tree here, and it is very simple, right. rpart label data is train, method is class. Okay, so because we are working with classification, right, we are predicting class here. So, our method would be class, and we will be doing this on training data, and this is the formula, right. We want to predict label, this is the dependent variable, and in dot we have all the features independent variables, and simply we can do that by rpart, and the results will be stored in this decision tree variable, right. This is where we will store the data, and we can then use this rpart.plot function and plot it, and so that we can see this structure a bit, right. You can see this structure at main equals to decision tree. So, this is the title here that we are measuring and putting here, right. And as you can see here in this tree structure, if you can see, because the font is very small, right. So, it is actually using, right, the information here, and this is where the decision is being made. Okay, and the decision being made is ATP 1B2 less than 11, no, we have the samples here, and yes, we have the samples here, right. And these are the different classes that are represented here. Okay, as you can see, these are actually classified, right, and the color code is given, right. So, we have 5 cancer types, and the first one, red, is the SCC that is being predicted here. The second one is orange, this is BLCA cancer type, this is SCC cancer type, this is BRCA cancer type that is being predicted, this is LAML, this is LGG, okay, and green. And you can also see these numbers here, for example, like there is in cases, for example, here you have 0.98 and 0.02. What it means is that some of the samples are being misclassified, right. So, this is what this 0.98 and 0.02 means. 20% means 20% of the samples are here, okay, and 22%. So, the sum should be 100%, right. Some of these leaf nodes, right, all the 100% data has now been classified, and so some of these would be 100%. But these numbers here, you can see 0.02, 0.00, etc. These are like the numbers for 5 classes. So, LGG is apparently the last class, which is 0.98, right. So, but then there will be 0.02 that are actually probably being misclassified, right. So, this is something we can see here in this plot, right. So, this kind of gives us a visual representation of the tree that has formed, right, from the training data. What you can also do is we can write something like variable importance, right, and decision tree variable importance will tell us, right, which genes are the important ones for this classification. Okay, we have seen some of this, for example, in our something like in principal component analysis, right. So, we had actually measured importance of these variables, or the most important variables that actually kind of explain the most of the variation in the data. So, here we also have this variable importance, right. So, again this is something starting from the root node and so on, right, and how these variables actually help in classifying, right. All right. So, this is we can also see, and the importance values are also given. Then what we are going to do next is we are going to predict, right, make predictions, right, and the command is as before is predict. This is the model that we have built, right. Based on this model, we will predict on the test data, right. That is why it is test now, and type is class because we are going classification, right. Okay. And here we are prediction. So, if you can see for each of these samples, we have this classification, right. So, for sample 1, this is LML, sample 2 LML, and so on, and these are the 5 levels that are there in the data, also in the predictions. What we have to do now is we have to calculate this accuracy, or we can simply look at the confusion matrix, right. And for doing that, we will use this library called caret, okay, and that will help us in looking into this confusion matrix. And as we have seen before, right, this is how the confusion matrix will look like, right, here. Okay. So, again the diagonal means we have good classification, right, and anything off diagonal means misclassification. And you can probably see here in case of BRCA, this is the reference, right, columns are reference and rows are the predictions. So, for in BRCA, for BRCA samples, right, you can see there is a lot of misclassification, right, only 3 of them are being predicted as BRCA, right, out of 10, and 5 are being classified as LAML, right. So, there is some sort of mistake right here by the model, by the decision tree. Okay. So, you have 9 this kind of thing, right. The diagonal is give us an idea about the classification accuracy, etc. Here you can see the overall statistics is about 0.76. That is not great compared to logistic regression what you have seen. Then you have a lot of measures like sensitivity, specificity, etc., which we will not talk about. But our accuracy is about, you can for class wise accuracy you can also calculate. For BRCA the accuracy actually is pretty poor, right, it is about 0.625, right, 62% accuracy. So, that is actually driving the overall accuracy down, right. So, this overall accuracy is 0.76, it is actually being driven down by this BRCA and BLCA because there is a lot of misclassification. All right. So, this will also change, right, if we change this. So, if we do this, run this again, right, we sample again training data, test data, this will change, right, because the data points will be different. So, this is using this rpart package, but again we can run this using this library partikit and the ctree command. We have the data, so I will not load the data again, right, and I am just loading this library which we will use for the ctree command, and the first few lines are same as before. So, I am not going to run them again, right. We already have loaded the data. So, we have this data already. The other thing I will show you is that there is another library that you can also use again to split the data, right. So, this is something, this is possible. There are different ways you can do the splitting. We have now seen in 3 different ways of splitting data, right, and here, right, sample split data split ratio is 0.8, again 80% of the data should go into training, 20% should be for test. Okay. And let us now run this model. The command, as I said, is ctree. Okay. So, this is the command. We are going to predict this level, right, and dot is these are the independent variables. We are running this decision tree on the training data, right, and that should give us the model. Okay. So, maybe this is not really easy to interpret. So, we can simply say plot model, and then we again have this tree kind of structure. And again, as we have seen before, right, this is what we have here. This is the root node, right, ATP 1, B2, and then we have these decisions, as you can see, less than equal to 10.898, greater than 10.898. Again, you might ask how is it choosing this 10.898 and so on, right. So, these classifications, again here we have another decision, right, and then we have these classes, and these are represented here. So, these are the frequency of these 5 classes, right. In some of these you can see these are completely pure, right, and in some cases they are mixed. So, again this is something that will look into when you look into the performance, right. So, then we have predictions. The command is very simple, predict model test, right. We are running the same model on the test data, and we again look into the confusion matrix, right. That is what going to tell us. So, this we are building a table, right, with test label. This is actual level of the data, actual class, and then we have the predictions. Okay. And this is the confusion matrix now, as you can see is okay. Again, it is not that great because you have this misclassification in case of BRC as well as some of them in BLC, right. So, this misclassification is happening. The other thing you will probably notice is because we are using this sample split function, then the samples are not split equally, right. So, for example, in test data for ACC we have 14 samples, but for BLC is 6 samples, right. So, this is something that we need to keep in mind when using these different functions. We can calculate this accuracy of this prediction, right, by saying the sum of this diagonal versus the total samples, right, and the accuracy is 0.73, which means that we have about 73% accuracy in this classification. Okay. So, it is not that great, right. Again we have seen from logistic regression we achieved about 90% accuracy. Here the accuracy is actually lower than that. Okay. All right. So, we will discuss, right, what could be the issues with decision trees, that what could be the reason that we do not use decision trees that much. Okay. Now, what we will also do now is we will apply this on, for example, on the regression tree. Okay. We have seen one classification. You can now apply this on noise data as well for classification, but we will apply on regression data, right. For we build a regression tree based on the noise data. Okay. So, this is what we are going to do next. Okay. And here the data is, so we have these libraries present here, but still okay, let us run them. The data we have seen before, this is the filtered merge data, and for which we struggled to get good accuracy in logistic regression, right, but that was a classification. So, you can try with decision tree and see whether there is an improvement. Now, when we run this is, again we have some of these filtering steps, and we now know what these filtering steps are doing. Okay. And this is the data, right. We have gene, average expression, DMYPD, etc. And as before, we will choose this DMYPD column. This is the value that we want to predict, and then we have some of the features here. Okay. And that is what we are going to do here in tab filter, right. We are choosing the DMYPD value, and we can check that. Okay. Okay, sorry, this should be tab filter 1, right. Yeah. So, this is the y variable in our case, and then we have the features. Okay. So, again we will do another filtering, right, where we are saying when variance is 0, we do not want those variable, when we do not want those features in our model, and then we are choosing only a few of these features for our model, but of course, you can run with all features in your hands on and see how that affects your results. And we will split now. Again we will generate this train data set and test data set. Here the strata is not important, this is actually important in case of classification trees. We want representation, equal representation from each class, right. So, here it is not important, we are not predicting any class. So, we can simply do random splitting, right, random sampling, and that will be enough. So, we are taking again 80% of the data for training and 20% of data for testing. We will use the package artpart and artpart.plot. Okay. So, artpart would be for building this tree, right, and again we are building this decision tree with this artpart command, and here we are predicting this DMYPD and this is our y, and dot would be our x values. Data is equal to train, right? We are running this model on training data. Method is ANOVA. Okay, this is something that is different, as you have seen, right? Earlier it was method equals to class. Okay, so if you are working on classification trees, you have to say class. We are working on regression tree, so we'll use this ANOVA model, right? And we can, as before, see how this tree looks like, and this is how this looks like, right? Again, we have these decisions. These cutoffs are given here. These are too small, so once you run this, you will see this for yourself. And again, you have these yes no decisions, and then different cutoffs, and then you have this classification of data, right? So in different beans, as you can see. Okay, and maybe we can see decision part. Sorry, decision tree, dollar variable importance. Again, the variables that are very important that are labeled here. As you can see, you have this feature is the most important one. Has the most importance, so that is given as the highest value here. And then these features are kind of ordered, right, according to their importance in this process. As you can see here in the tree, this is the first feature that is used, right? As you can see, this is a very important feature. Okay. And then we will going to make the predictions, okay, and the command is predict. We use the decision tree that we have built, and we apply this on the test data, and method is ANOVA again, right, because we are building regression tree. So this is something we'll do. Let's see the predictions, okay, and this is the predictions for these values, okay, and see how well we are able to predict these values here, okay. And again, we can check this, right, by correlation, because we have the values here. So correlation test, okay, so it's about 0.38, and there is p value, right? There is significant correlation between the predicted and the actual values, and we can plot these predictions, right, and see, okay, there is okay prediction, but it's not that great, to be honest. We can do better. And we can calculate something called mean absolute error, right, and this is simply the difference between predictions and the actual values divided by the length. So it's kind of taking the mean, right. So number of observations that we have, and number of observations where we have these predictions, and the difference between these predictions and the actual values, that we are taking the sum and dividing by the number of observations. So we are getting the mean absolute error. Okay. So lower mean absolute error means we are closer to that prediction, to the actual value. So predictions are close to the actual value. Okay, so this is actually not that great from what we have seen in the plot. We can try the other package that we talked about. Again, is this library particate. Will use this C3 command. Okay, and use model C3, right. DMYPD, this is y, and this dot means we are going to use all features in there, and we are applying this on the training data. Okay. So once this is done, we can again run this model. It will again give us this kind of structure, and again probably you notice that here again this feature, number of regulatory tiers, is actually the most important feature here, is at the root node. Okay, and this is kind of then being decisions are being taken, these cutoffs are there, yes no decisions you can see, and at the end you have this, instead of this class information, right, because this is not classification tree, this is a decision tree, regression tree, where we are trying to predict values of these samples or the genes. Here is the distribution of these values. Okay, so this is what is given here. Okay. Now this is on the training data. Now we want to predict on the test data, right. So that's the idea. Okay, and let's see what are the predictions. Okay, so we have these predictions, and let's see how these predictions look like. So again, we are going to do a correlation test between predictions and the actual values. The correlation is slightly higher here, it's 0.46, but there is significant correlation, and we can also plot these predictions and the actual values, right. And okay, this seems like some correlation, right. So, higher values here actual values and higher predicted values. So, there seems to be some correlation, and as before we can again calculate this mean absolute error. It is slightly lower in this case, but again as I said, right, if you run this multiple times, because of the composition of the training data set and the test data set, these absolute errors and the correlations will change. So, you have to run this multiple times to get a mean average MAE values and how much that varies, right, the standard deviation and so on. Okay, so, we have seen hands on of how to build classification tree using the cancer data, but you can also build this on noise data, and the code will be very similar. You have to process the data, load the data, and then run that, and you can see that tree structure, and then you will also get the classification accuracy and the confusion matrix. We have also built the regression tree with the hands on. So, we have seen this with the noise data set, and we can now see how accurate the predictions are by calculating something called mean absolute error, right, that kind of measuring the difference between the predictions and the actual values, but we can also look at the correlations and the plot the predicted versus absolute values. So, let us now go back to the presentation, and there are a few things I want to discuss. So, first I will discuss what are the advantages of decision trees, and then I will discuss what are the drawbacks of decision trees. So, what are the advantages of decision trees? As we have seen now after doing the hands on, is that they are very simple, right. We can try to if we look at the tree structure, we understand how these decisions are being made, right, what are the decision criteria, okay, and which means these are also interpretable, because then we can find the variables that are very important for this classification or regression. Okay. So, we have seen this variable importance when doing the hands on. The other thing we have noticed is that there is no scaling or normalization of data is required, right. This is not important here, because decisions are made on absolute values of these features. There is no underlying assumption about distribution, right. We have not made any assumption, right. These models actually do not make any assumption. So, that is very good for you can apply for any kind of data sets, right, without worrying about the distribution, etc. Right. For linear regression, etc., there are a lot of assumptions, etc. We have also mentioned that the decision trees can handle non-linear relationship, right. It is not necessary that we are assuming linear relationship between the predictor, right, the independent variables and the response variable, right. This is not necessary here, and decision trees can handle non-linear relationship. What are the drawbacks, right? And as you have seen, right, some of the accuracy values were a bit lower than, for example, logistic regression in case of classification, right. Now, one of the most important drawbacks or major drawback of decision trees is that this is very sensitive to variation in data. So, the tree structure will change, and that will of course change your accuracy of classification or regression, right. So, this tree structure is sensitive to variation in data. There is also a chance of overfitting, right, because as you can see, we can go down up to classifying single sample, right, accurately in the training data. So, that will lead to overfitting. There is also a known bias towards features with more levels. So, if you have some features where there are more levels, that feature will be given more importance, and this is something that is there. Now, we will be talking about first two kind of points, how do we address these drawbacks, right. And so, this is something we will be talking in the next class, how do we address this issue of sensitivity to variation in data, okay. And this is where the random forest method comes in, which we will be discussing in the next class. What we are going to talk about is very briefly about overfitting, right. How do you prevent overfitting in the case of decision trees, right. So, in decision trees, overfitting can occur very easily, because the tree can go on, right, to try to accurately predict class values of all data points, right. You can build this very deep tree, and that will classify all the data points accurately in the training data, but it might perform poorly on the test data, right. So, the solution is, okay, let us not try to fit a very accurate tree in the training data itself. So, limit this tree depth. So, that is the first solution. So, we are not going to allow tree go to a very like a deep level. We limit like how deep the tree can be. This is something that we can fix. We can also stop after reaching a certain level of purity, right. After we have reached certain level of purity in the classification process, we stop this tree, right. We do not allow the tree from going further. We can also specify how many minimum number of observations that will be required to build another level of classification or regression, right. So, this is something we can also restrict, by saying okay, we need this minimum number. Or what we can do after the tree is built, we can do something called pruning, right. We can kind of cut those deeper levels, right. We can remove those deeper levels by a process called pruning. Okay, so what we have seen, right, these classification trees that we build by decision tree method can enable data classification, whereas regression trees enable prediction of values of the response variable, right. We have seen hands-on of both of these. And as we have seen from this structure, tree structure on real data set, that these trees are interpretable. So, we can identify these variables of importance, and these trees can also work with nonlinear relationship between variables. And we have also discussed advantages and drawbacks of decision trees in this class. Thank you.